Good to see you. All right. Look at us getting moving here. All right. Waiting for the stream to come up there. We are showing live, so that's good. How's everybody doing today? Just checking to make sure. Look at that. Looks like we're live everywhere. So, I hope everybody starts to jump in a little bit here. We're getting things going. Look at that. I have a dog here. We have an Australian Shepherd, and she is with me always to the end of the age. I'm telling you, that dog sheds like you would not believe. But she's really cute, and she's a really good dog. So, anyway, that's a side note. All right, we are up and running and streaming and live and all that kind of stuff. So, just gonna get started in here in a couple of minutes. Hope everybody is having a good day, and that you are doing well on this beautiful Thursday morning. I don't know about, with you guys, it's been rainy here, even though I think it's supposed to be better today, and then it's supposed to rain more this weekend, because, of course, it always has to rain on Saturday. Of course, if you're in, like, West Texas or the Panhandle, you're like, please, let it rain, let it rain. But here we're like, oh, yeah, it's going to rain again. So I used to live in East Texas, and East Texas, it rains a lot. It's like Seattle or something, which I like the rain, so it didn't bother me. I love to sit and listen to it. We had a metal roof on our house, and the rain would hit the roof, and you could just listen to it. It was a good sound. It was a good sound. I liked it a lot. Beautiful area out there in East Texas. So we need to get people in from East Texas. You East Texasans need to be streaming with us, guys. Y'all need to be with us because we are one. So anyway, I see. Where's Dave? Dave's not feeling well today, so we're gonna give him. He's liable to show up in the chat. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure he already has showed up in the chat, because who else would type in all caps word with exclamation points? I'm just saying, only Dave would do that. So if you're on the YouTube channel right now, you will see. Yeah, that's what I thought right here. He is with us, but not with us. Not feeling great today. He's had better days, but he's still with us in spirit and in text. Which, I don't know, being there in text. See, you guys are with me in text, and I feel like you're with me. And so I feel like we're all together in that way. So, that's just it. So look at that. Everybody's jumping in. Glad to have you today. I will be running solo today. Dave under the weather. So we'll be covering some audio stuff today as we kind of walk forward. Always happy to get to talk about audio. So we'll kick the show off here in just a couple minutes. I guess I should have thought about what my opening was going to be. It's going to be like, hi, I'm not Dave Curley, and I'm a church media creator. Is that how I should start? Be like, hey there, I'm not Dave Curley, word, and I am still a church media creator, even though my name is not Dave Curley. I don't know, who gets names like Dave Curley? Like, my name is Curtis James. It's not near as like Dave Curley, it just kind of rolls off, rolls off your tongue, even though if I was Curly, people would be like, are you actually a member of the Three Stooges? Because I would be Curly. So anyway, Star Wars last week, that was my favorite show we've done, by the way. But I want you guys to know there's some more shows, kind of creative shows like that on their way. Don't be surprised if you don't see Batman show up. Can y'all see? Yeah, y'all can see my Batman. See, this is a signed picture of Adam West. My pastor gave me that. Who's got a pastor cooler than that? He gave me a signed picture. And this right here, we should just have a whole show about the stuff on my shelf, which actually I'm working on arranging things in a new space where I actually have lots and lots of stuff. And so we probably will talk about it. But this right here, this is my beloved Aubrey. My wife is an artist, so she painted a picture of my bloodhound, who's currently at home, probably howling. I can't hear her right now, but if I listen closely, I probably could, because, man, it carries, let me tell you. So yeah, so all kinds of cool stuff on my shelf. My signed Coach K Duke ball. That's a fun story that I should probably tell sometime because it's super fun. So anyway, um, getting messages all across the board. Yeah, I've got a new studio space I'm working on right now. It's gonna be cool. I'm working on the lighting right now. I think I've got all the network stuff worked out. I was having network problems in that space, but I've actually streamed from there before, but we had some network problems, and so I think we've got it worked out to get back in that space. It's kind of my workspace where I have my keyboard and some different things like that. So very, very cool. Uh, so anyway, good to see everybody in. So we're about to get started. Matter of fact, we're going to get started maybe here in just a second. And maybe we'll start by talking about my signed Coach K Duke ball because, it's there. Yeah, all kinds of goodies. I got my Luke Skywalker lightsaber that my kids gave me. I've got my degrees and some good books. My clock here that my wife gave me. This is truly one of my favorite pieces. My wife gave me this. We ran into this guy at a little clock store nearby, and I just thought it was awesome, and she gave it to me. So anyway, the time is wrong on it, so don't look at that, or you'll be very confused. So, all right, we are going to get kicked off. Glad everybody's jumped in with us. So here we go. Going to get ready. Going to get the main brain in gear. Like I said, I probably should have thought about what I was going to say at the opener, but I won't. I'll just I'll pull a Dave Curley and I'll just make it up right now. The most common thing in every church when it comes to audiovisual equipment is your sound system. No matter what you have in your church, you probably have some kind of sound system. And today, that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm Curtis James, and I'm a church media creator here with you, ready to talk about how God can use your skills, your abilities, and your equipment to amplify the gospel for the kingdom. And so we want to do that today. Glad you're with us. I am running solo today. No Dave Curley. Dave's a little under the weather today, yet he's in the chat with us. So I'm sure if you put a little something in there, he'll respond in some way. His fingers are still working, evidently. They didn't shut down with his illness. So glad to have him in there. But he's not on camera today, and you're not going to hear his voice. You are stuck with me for the whole time. And so the best thing I could think of to go ahead and run with today was to talk about audio. So it's absolutely true that you can go into just about any church in the country, and as long as there's more than 30 or 40 people in the room, there's some kind of sound system. There could be a little karaoke box on the stage that's playing music that has a microphone attached to it. There could be a small sound system, medium size, large sound system, digital, analog, all kinds of stuff. But it's almost impossible to find a church that's not using some form of sound system. And so even if you're streaming and if you got video projection up and all that kind of stuff, if they walked in and said, we're going to take 3/4 of your equipment away from you, you would end up keeping the audio because when we go into the room and when we sit down, the most important thing is that we hear the Word of God and understand it. And if we can't do that, then why are we there? And so that's why the sound system is important. It's also because sound systems have been available and usable for so much longer than any of this other stuff. I mean, if you think about it, if you think about how long we've been using sound systems in the church in comparison to how long we've been using projection, how long we've been using the ability to create with a camera, whether even back when I was a kid, my church was on TV, and so as you think about those dynamics, those things really were out of the reach of most churches for a long time. I remember in a church I served in one of my first churches, we did this radical thing, and we had a Saturday night contemporary service where I played guitar, and we had a keyboardist, and I think had a bassist, and we borrowed a projector from our local association of churches, and we displayed words up on a screen with a black background because the projector was like a 300 ANSI lumen projector, right? And so it was like, I think that says victory, right? You know what I mean? And so as we look back at that, and to me that seems like a long time ago, and I am officially old, but it's nothing in comparison to how long our audio equipment's been in use. As a matter of fact, your church may have audio equipment. You may be using audio equipment that was there the first day they ever put it in, right? I mean, sad but true. You can probably open a drawer and find a microphone from 1952 in it, don't use it. Don't use it, please. Don't use it. That should probably be one of the earliest things we talk about. So when we address sound systems and things like that, it's really important that we realize the history we're dealing with, but just the importance of that equipment. And so even if you're a small church that has a karaoke box on your stage, you're using a sound system. And so what I want to talk about is some of the components and some of the basic operation stuff. Now, for some of you guys, I'm sure this is going to be old hat. It's going to be review for you. You have been running sound for years and years and years, decades, whatever. I want to encourage you, when we stop learning, we stop being useful. And so even if there's maybe one thing that I might share in this show today that you could use, then I think it's actually worth it for you. And I think it's good to be reminded of some things. I know myself, I have a tendency to lax off on some specific practices or not think about some specific setups and things because it's always been that way. We walked in the door and it was already set up. And so I do think that it's important that we remain teachable and focused on continuing to learn and develop. So anyway, lots of activity in the chat. I'm assuming that Dave is riling everybody up in there. Look at that. Yeah, some good stuff in here. We'll talk about some of this as we get to the close. So, but as we kind of walk through this today, I do think that that the first thing we need to understand is just the basic setup of an audio system. Okay. And again, some of you may be like, really? We're talking about this? Yes, really, we're talking about it. It's equipment in every single sanctuary. And a lot of times, the only thing we know about it is I come in and I flip this switch or I flip these 4 switches and stuff comes on and then I move forward. But I don't know where stuff is. I don't know why stuff is. And that means I don't know what's wrong when something's not working right. So what I want to talk about first is just basic room setup. Now, I don't have a lot of images and stuff for you guys today because we kind of shifted gears late on this one. But I do want you to just think about your setup because a lot of times your setup needs to change over time and it doesn't because we have permanent installations. So there are some specific components to your system. Normally you have speakers, right? You say, oh, I have speakers. Your speakers may be sitting on stands. They may be hanging from the ceiling. They may be tucked behind some kind of wall grate somewhere and you've never actually seen them. But your speakers obviously are important. Their placement is really important because depending on where your speakers are placed, you can create all kinds of different issues in your room. So for instance, one of the most common ways to set up speakers would be one on each side of your stage, and they would project kind of inward to fill in the center of your room. And it's, like I said, very common. The problem we face there is anytime we offset our speakers like that, we're going to create dead spaces in a phase spot in our room. So first of all, by doing that, you probably have a dead spot right in the front center of your room because you can't angle them in far enough to hit the very front. And so that's probably not a great sounding spot in your room. And then someplace further back, depending on the angles of your speakers, you probably have a phase point. And when I say that, what I'm describing is this, and you'll be able to turn on music and just walk around your empty room, walk around the middle of the room, and at some point it's going to sound like somebody boxed your ears. It really does. And it'll be a small space, probably just a few feet. But there's going to be a spot in your room where this phase cancellation is taking place, where the sound is colliding in this way. And so that's what happens when you have those two sources coming to a single spot. And so you could say, well, if I do stereo, that won't happen. That's actually not true because are you really panning your keyboard to the right and your guitar to the left? No, I mean, you've got instruments like a guitar that's running mono, and so you probably have phase points in your room. Now there is the possibility your phase points happening above heads, and you can't hear it, but that probably means your speakers aren't well focused, and so you're probably not getting the sound in the places you want to anyway. And so as you think about it, the important thing is not to say, well, then that's the wrong setup. The important thing is to know where that phase point is, because you can know if somebody comes back to you and says, I can't understand anything that's going on. You can say, well, if you'll sit 3 feet over, then that problem goes away for you. And you just need to know it's there. Now, when we talk about speaker placement in our basic equipment setup, it is crazy important to understand a couple of dynamics, all right? The height of your speaker also matters to that placement. Now, you'll notice in a lot of churches we have a centralized cluster of speakers up over the center of the stage toward the front, and they're clustered together, and that sound is pushing out. Now, the reason that they do that is because it eliminates the phase cancellation point in the room, because those sounds are pushing out from one another instead of into one another. And so, in essence, what that does is it eliminates that, and it creates a much more even sound, and it fills that gap in the front center of your room. That's kind of important, like the front center of your room. I understand you're like, well, no one sits on the front row at my church. No one sits on the front 3 rows at my church, you know. Yeah, I know. So that drives me crazy. At one point years ago, I was at a church where we had chairs, and we had chairs in the room. It was a flat floor, and my pastor would always get so frustrated that everybody would sit toward the back. So he told me one day, he said, on one Sunday morning, I want you to come in and I want you to set up just a really small little setup in the back of the room with a mic and stuff, so you can lead worship from back there. He said, at the beginning of the service, we're going to go back there and tell everybody to turn their chairs around. And we did, and everybody was now at the front of the room, and it got his message across, because people started moving more toward the front in the next coming weeks. But I understand what you mean when you say, hey, people aren't sitting up toward the front of the room. But the truth is that front center, guys, this is our sweet spot. We really want to hit it. That's why a cluster is really nice to have if you can. Now, that brings in an important question about speaker placement, and that comes down to the elevation of your speaker, okay? So the elevation of your speaker is very important. When we put speakers on a speaker stand, there's a reason you don't just set it on the floor. If you set it on the floor, then the bodies in the front absorb the sound, and nobody has any clarity in the back. Plus, it means someone's like 3 feet from the speaker and they're getting blown away. So normally we set them on speaker stands and get that up over their heads. But speaker stands only go up so far, 6-7 feet to the base of your speaker most of the time. And even at that, we're like, whoa, it's going to fall over when a kid runs into it, right? So we have these different elevations. When we do, we hang them from the sides, or we put them in little cubby holes or something, we can get them up higher. And the question would be, why? Why do we want them up higher? Like, don't we want them closer to our people? But it's a bit of a math equation, really, and it's about equidistance, okay? So when I have people in a room, and they're sitting here, right? And I have a speaker. This is a really big speaker. It's got subwoofer built into it, obviously. So when I have a speaker here, then you can see the distance from the front row and the distance from the back row. But as I raise that speaker up, I'm increasing the distance from the front row more than I'm increasing the distance from the back row. Okay? That means that instead of blowing out the people at the front of the room, I can make it more equidistant. Still going to be probably a little hotter toward the front of the room, but I am making it so much more even between the front and the back of the room. And the people in the back of the room are getting clearer sound. They're getting a more consistent sound with the people in the front of the room. People in the front of the room aren't like, it's so loud up here, it's so loud. You always get that. So as you raise your speaker up, you can create more equidistance. It all depends on your ceiling height in your sanctuary. Obviously, if you have a 12-foot ceiling in your sanctuary, you can't go very high. Your speaker stand's going to kind of get your speaker as high as it could go. But if you've got a 15 or 20 foot ceiling or a 30 foot ceiling, you have the opportunity to raise that speaker up and make that sound more balanced throughout the room. And that's true whether you're in a centralized cluster or outside, or something I really didn't mention, which is if you have a newer system, you may have ribbon speakers, the line arrays. The line arrays are going to be those long, that look like ribbons, so we call them ribbon speakers, those long speakers that mount to one another and have a bit of an angle to them. So those are very popular right now. They're one of the best things to put in your sanctuary because they do help get the sound to all the places you want to get them to in the room. Good sound, it's good design. And those usually hang, depending on your room, they'll hang one in the middle, or they'll hang two, or they'll hang, 4 or 5, however many, depending on the size of your sanctuary. And those are almost always hung. I've seen them on stands. Truth is, that is not what they're made for. If you're putting them on stands, you're really not getting the most out of that speaker. You probably spent a lot of money on a speaker that you didn't need to spend a lot of money on. You probably should have just gone with a 15 and a horn as opposed to the line arrays. But that's a whole other story. So when we talk about the line arrays, we want to have that ribbon speaker. They hang up as high as we can get them a lot of times. Sometimes they'll hang them down if your ceiling is really, really high. But the goal, again, is to create equidistance between those front and back rows and to eliminate, phase cancellation points throughout the room. So yeah, some different things on here. We'll have we got a lot of statements. Of course, it's because Dave's just stirring the pot in there. We'll look at some of those as we go. But as we think about the speaker setup, the other dynamic that really comes into play, and this is one of the things I've actually seen, the biggest speaker problem I've seen in churches, and that is speaker placement. So we have either on the sides or over the front of the stage, we have our speakers mounted, but we mounted those years ago, and what did we do? We extended our stages because we were adding instruments to the stage. We're adding a drum set to the stage. We're adding vocalists to the front of the stage, whatever. So we've extended our stages out, but we haven't moved our speakers. And so what it means is that all of a sudden my speaker is behind the front of the stage. That is a feedback disaster waiting to happen, okay? I'm just telling you guys, when your speakers get behind your microphones, all you're going to do is fight feedback all the time, okay? So when you extend the stage and you move the people forward, but we don't move the speaker, then all of a sudden feedback, which is simply a frequency loop, okay? It's like when I was in junior high and I did a science fair project, and I hooked up a battery, one of those big batteries, and a wire around this piece of wood, and there were 2 screws, and the wires wrapped around each, and then I had different items that you could put between the 2 screws, and there was a buzzer in line. And if you put something that conducted electricity, the buzzer would go off. If you put something that didn't conduct electricity, it wouldn't go off. So if you put another screw across it, it'd buzz. If you put a piece of cloth across it, it wouldn't. If you used aluminum foil, it would buzz softly because it wasn't conducting the electricity as well. So it just showed you how electricity flows in a loop. Sound is very similar. Basically, our problem is because we're completing a circuit with that screw or that aluminum foil or whatever. When I put sound into a microphone and it goes through my microphone, through my system, back out my speakers, back through my microphone again, I create a frequency loop. We call it feedback. Okay. Matter of fact, if I turned my volume up right now on my computer, you would hear feedback because I have a computer speaker right next to my microphone, and all of a sudden you would have feedback there. And so you would have this uncontrollable loop of one or multiple frequencies. So when I put my speakers behind my microphones, I am completing that circuit, and it'll continue to grow until I do something to stop it, like muting the channel or pulling the volume down or whatever. And so as we look at speaker placement, we've got to consider the changes that have taken place in our room, in addition to just where they are initially placed. Too high, too low, angled in the wrong ways. If your speakers are hanging from the ceiling pointing straight at the back wall, all you're getting is reverberation to anyone in your room. It's bouncing off back walls, side walls, before it ever gets to them. That's why they'll say, I can't understand it, just sounds like noise in the room. Well, a lot of times it's because our speakers aren't focused toward our people. Depending on the depth of your room, what I found is actually extremely helpful for a lot of churches. Any sanctuary 300 or less, maybe 400 or less in capacity, that's a wider, not a longer format. If you have a 3 speaker cluster at the front and you're using a traditional setup of horns and like a 15 with a horn, if you invert your center speaker and put it upside down, then the horn is now on bottom and that sound disperses earlier in your room, and it really gives you a lot more crispness at the front of the room without having to angle your speakers something extreme that makes the back of your room not hear well. You flip that center speaker over, and then all of a sudden you don't need the extreme angle, and you'll get better sound at the front center, but you'll also be able to keep the speakers angled to where you're getting good sound toward the back of the room. So all that has to do with speaker placement, and I know if your speakers are hanging up there, you think, how in the world are we going to go make a change? And sometimes it's not practical. Sometimes we just have to deal with what we've got. But if you get an opportunity and you can say, well, our speakers are pointing straight to the back wall, all I have to do is just take 2 links out of the chain on the bottom and the back, and all of a sudden they're going to be angled down more. It'll help you and it'll make a difference. If you're having major problems with people in the front hearing, then maybe inverting that center speaker is worth the work. It can be a lot of work. But mainly, if you're looking at replacing equipment, that's a good opportunity to correct some of those issues. And so those are some dynamics when it comes to speaker. Now, I just want to look at our comments here real quick, just because there's a lot going on here. Let's see. I see bounce the speakers off the wall if you know stands. Yeah, we definitely don't want to be bouncing sound around. Our goal is always to focus our sound in the room. So a lot of people say, well, our room has a lot of reverberation. There's a lot of sound bouncing around. The best way to dampen the sound and control the sound in your room is human bodies. There is no better acoustic deadening material than the human body. So fill your room with people and you'll correct your sound problems. Great, right? Yeah, it means people are coming to church. We want them to come to church. But do make sure your speakers are focused toward the people and not toward any other objects. So focus toward the people and allow that to not deaden your sound, but to buffer your sound and keep you from dealing with a lot of reverberation. Because as churches, a lot of our buildings are 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. And so they weren't built really with sound reproduction in mind. And I guess I'll go ahead and ramble about this just a second. So there's sound reinforcement and there's sound reproduction. Okay, this is not something people really talk about much. They call what we do sound reinforcement. So an example of sound reinforcement would be back, 40 years ago when I have an organ playing and it's got pipes or it's got its own speakers, and I've got a piano, a grand piano, the lid is open, I've got a choir of 80 people up in front. All of those things are not going through the sound system. Maybe they are just complete acoustic sound coming from my room right there. And then I have like a soloist or a lead vocalist who's on a microphone, and I am reinforcing their sound, or I'm putting choir mics on my choir. They're providing a lot of acoustic value in my room already, right? But I'm going to mic them so I can bring them up a little bit, have a little bit of control over them. That's sound reinforcement, okay? Sound reinforcement is I'm making sound in the room and you're boosting it, which seems like what we do all the time. Anytime I'm singing, my voice is being reinforced, not reproduced, okay? But in today's world, there are a lot of things that are only being reproduced, like, say, your keyboard. Your keyboard is not producing any sound on its own. The only acoustic sound it's doing is thump, 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 right? The only thing you're getting from it is the person until you run it through your sound system and you reproduce that sound. You're not reinforcing the sound because there's nothing to reinforce. Your bass guitar really is not bringing any acoustic value to your room, right? If you're using tracks, that's not bringing any acoustic value to your room. And even in today's world, most vocalists were not taught to project like we used to do. They rely on the microphone And so we are reinforcing their sound, but a lot of times it's more reproduction based. And when we're talking about streaming and things like that, then we are reproducing that sound on our stream. We're not reinforcing it because there's nothing to reinforce, right? So this concept of sound reinforcement and sound reproduction is an interesting idea. When our buildings were built, at best they were built to be sound reinforcement rooms, not sound reproduction rooms. And so as we deal with sound reproduction, that's what we want to control. That's why new church buildings are being built to be dead rooms. They're being built to not have a lot of reverberation in them so that we can just control the sound. We cage our drummers. We try to eliminate everything acoustic from the room. To be honest with you, that's kind of the goal of modern sound in the church. We cage our drummers. I'm for cage-free drummers, by the way. Cage-free drummers by 2025. Anyway, I think there's a campaign out there I'm going to join. Cage-free drummers by 2025, free range. Okay, so anyway, but we've eliminated all the amplifiers from the stage. Our electric guitarists are running direct, or they're running through like a preamp. Our bassists are doing the same. They're going through a Sans amp or something like that. We are eliminating acoustic sound from the room so that we can control it as we reproduce the sound in the room and other places. There's probably going to be a movement in the next 10 to 15 years to actually see churches adding some acoustic values back to their rooms, because these are trends, and you're going to see some returns of some liturgy and some different things. You're actually going to see some architectural changes. I really believe that over the next 10 to 15 years in how churches are being built, but it's never going to stop being a sound reproduction setting. I'll give you guys a perfect example. We're planning on building a new worship center at our church in the coming years, and no rush. They're expensive, but we actually are employing a company who works with the architect to help us develop a stage that says, okay, the drums go here, and this is an acoustic dead space in the room. Like, the room is designed for that space to have drums and for them not to need to be caged anymore because of the acoustic design in the room. Whereas this is where we would put our choir, and it will actually have some acoustic value. And so the room will be designed for some specific acoustic uses. And I think that's probably the future. Dead rooms feel dead. We have to create all of our own reverb with effects and things like that, which don't sound real, don't look real. Okay? People are growingly wanting more and more real and less not real, which is interesting when you see the increase of use in tracks. But that's a different conversation we're not going to have today. So, anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, I understand. But as we consider our room setup, we have to realize that what's in our room, the design may be designed for sound reinforcement when we're doing more sound reproduction in our room. So we want to consider that when we're placing speakers and we're trying to avoid the bounce off of the hardwood ceilings and the brick walls, which is what we have right now in our room. Sound nightmare, just telling you guys. Okay, so as we look at the redesigns in our rooms, we can understand that we're really not paying attention to how do these redesigns reflect themselves in our audio equipment. So always look when somebody says, hey, we're adding a leaf to the stage, or we're going to add some steps, or we're going to do whatever. Okay, let's look at how that's going to affect our room. Do we need to try to think about making some adjustments to our speaker placement? So I understand I've been talking about lots about speakers, so here's some comments. Getting rid of their amps. Clearing the stage is something that's been going on for about 15 years. So Aviom in-ears changed the world for us all in providing with on-stage personal in-ear monitoring mixing. Your church probably has some capabilities of this, whether you're using Aviom or Behringer or any of the countless other ones. I forget what the name of the company we're using right now. They're good. And so lots of good stuff out there. But the elimination of the amplifiers has to do with the control in the room, just like what we were just talking about. We eliminate the amplifiers from the room because the sound man has absolutely no control. We say, well, we put a microphone on it. Yeah, but if you're in a room of 200 people and your electric guitarist is running a Fender Deluxe. Dude, he's running a Fender Deluxe. You're done. You got nothing. Man, he can probably blow your whole system out with his volume. So you're telling him, yeah, run that at 0.35, and he's wanting 11, you know what I'm saying? Now, that's a clearly a part of his it's clearly a part of his instrument. You need to understand that. He's getting part of his sound from that amplifier. So to just tell him, hey, you can't have it anymore, I know that's what a lot of people do, but it's hard. And so you need to walk people through that. Bass amplifiers are the same way. That's where they get their EQs and stuff. That's why I always recommend, if you're running, and I know this is not, we're still talking about sound system setup, but it is responding to a question. If you're running a stage and you're wanting to run a quiet stage, spend a little bit of money and put your electric guitarist through a good preamp, or maybe a tube preamp. It'll help him get the sound he's used to getting. Put your bassist through a preamp like a Sans amp or something like that. Really clean up the sound. If you run them direct, it's bad, guys. You need something in line. Now, your acoustic guitarist, there's a preamp probably built into their guitar. If their guitar is struggling a little bit, you can go and put like a pair of DI or something like that in there. A pair of DI is a good way to kind of put some body into a guitar that doesn't sound great. Any of these things can be overused, and then they say everything sounds too digital. So be careful about that. But yeah, so when we talk about one more thing about speakers, looping back around, I understand. In our modern setting, it's more common than not that we see active speakers instead of passive speakers. Let me explain what I mean. Passive speakers don't have amplification. We plug into them and from an amplifier, and that's how we get sound out of them. Active speakers have amplifiers built into them. Most line arrays, like I was describing, are active. Not all, but a lot of them are active. A lot of the speakers you buy today are going to be active speakers, the QSCs and the Behringers and the Mackeys and whoever. They're all going to be powered. Your subwoofers are almost all going to be powered. There are some passive ones out there, and you'll see big price differences in them because the amplifier is not built in. Here's the thing about active versus passive. The downside to an active speaker that has the amplifier built in is now you're coupling two different pieces of equipment into one, which means when one fails, you find yourself probably replacing it, or if you're replacing it, though, you're replacing two pieces, so it costs more. In addition to that, a speaker normally lasts longer than an amplifier, which means you're probably going to have to replace your speakers more often because your amplifiers are going to go out. Now, you can get things repaired, but it's expensive. We had a powered subwoofer go out. Actually, it was a whole tower went out on us. A circuit board went out, and that was it. The sub has to be replaced. The whole thing, not just the amplifier in it, not just having it repaired, was going to cost about the same as buying a new one. And so when you consider active, just know that you're probably going to have a little shorter life, and its placement is going to be interesting because now you have to have power to your speaker, like electrical power. So if you're going to hang that speaker up in the center of your room, you're going to have to plug it in somewhere. And the biggest mistake I see for a lot of churches when they do this is they actually don't have a way to power cycle their speakers, and they leave them on all the time. So think about it this way. Your speakers are 20 feet up in the air, 25 feet up in the air. They're in the hottest place in your room. When you're running the heater at wintertime, it's the hottest place. When it's summertime and it's hot, it's the hottest place. The enemy to your amplifiers is heat, and they're just hanging up there, and they're on all the time. Even during the week when your sanctuary air conditioners are off all week long, and it's 100 degrees in there. I'm in Texas, so it gets hot. All right, 100 degrees in there, and you're just cooking your amplifiers, and you're shortening the life of those amplifiers. If you're going to suspend your active speakers, make sure you have a power switch ability somewhere, that somehow you can turn off the power to those speakers every time you use them. Okay, way important that you consider that, because those speakers, those amplifiers will burn out on you. All right, So that's our speakers. That's kind of the talk about that. We've taken most of our time talking about speakers, but there are kind of two other components, or really one and a half. We've already mentioned amplifiers. Kind of the next piece is the amplifier. If you have active speakers, those amplifiers are built into your speaker. They're already designed to cross over for your speaker. And you probably have a volume control. You may have a tone knob or something like that on that speaker. That is like having the volume or the gain level on your amplifier. So you want to set that appropriately as it interacts with your board so that you've got enough headroom and things like that. So your amplifiers also, if you're passive, then your amplifiers are in a rack somewhere. Now that rack may be right under your feet by your soundboard. That rack may be back underneath your stage. That rack may be in a closet somewhere. Who knows? I found them all over the place. And you say, well, why would you put it up there? Okay. So, amplified signal degrades over time, but line signal does not at the same rate. Okay, so when I run line signal, which is not an amplified signal, it can go hundreds of feet with pretty much no degradation, and then I can amplify it. So if you're in the back of your room and you need a 250-foot run to get to your speakers, beyond about 50 to 100 feet, you're starting to lose signal if you're sending an amplified signal, which means you're getting less power and more resistance on your lines going to your speakers. So in design, a lot of times guys move the amplifiers to where they're closer to the speakers. We run a line level from the board output to the amplifiers, and then that run is shorter, putting less strain on your amps and getting more power and clarity to your speakers. So that's why they're placed in different places. A lot of times the math doesn't actually add up. Like I've been in settings where it's like the run from the soundboard to the speaker would be 125 feet, and the run from backstage to the speaker is 100 feet. I'm like, why are we doing all this? And so that's something to consider. The gauge of your speaker cabling from the amplifier is really important. For speaker level gauge, you want to be running really 14 is really great. If you're running 20 gauge to your speakers, you're dying. You're killing your amplifiers, and your speakers aren't getting what they need because there's just not enough wires, strands inside that cable to carry the amplified signals. So as you're running that cable, just know that if you're active speakers, they're hanging up there, the amplifier is built in. If you're passive, that amplifier is separate, and we're having to run the cables between everything. All that does is amplify your signal. Now, a lot of amplifiers do have processors in them, and you can process them out to low cut things or high cut, or do crossovers for subs or whatever, which we won't go into that right now. Some of those are good, some of them aren't. Almost all of them have compression built into them, so you don't blow the amplifier out, things like that. A lot of those processors are pretty serviceable, so don't be afraid to use them. Just know what they are before you institute any kind of filters into your amplifiers, and make sure you're not double filtering. Make sure you're not doing something at the board that you're again doing at the amplifier, because then you're going to end up overdoing whatever you were trying to do. So just keep that in mind. Don't cross over at your board and at your amplifier. Cross over at one or the other. Don't high cut. Don't ever high cut your amplifier, actually. But don't do the same processing in two places, because it's not beneficial for you. It's probably messing with you a little bit. The last component that we talk about in the room is the soundboard. And the soundboard, I even have a picture of. Here's a soundboard for you. Ta-da! This is an Allen Heath board. Great digital board. We love it. It's a wonderful thing. This board has what we call our fader bank down here. This allows us to control the mix in the room, our main mix. We have all the different features of the board as far as how we control input and things like that. We have our control. This is our display that will change depending on what channel we're on, what setting we're using. We see this has the channel display. You've got the equalizer being displayed, any kind of low cut, those kinds of things. We've got our mute buttons or on-off buttons depending on who manufactured your board. Your select to select each individual channel. Your PFL AFL, we talked about this recently, allows you to solo this one channel to your headphones or to a meter or something like that, so you can see what's going on with it. And things like that. We won't go into all the details of how a soundboard works, because that would be a whole show in itself. But this is the brains behind the brawn of your speakers and your amplifiers and things like that. So this is where a lot of the work is taking place and where a lot of our skill is. But when we talk about system setup, it's just the brains behind how it all works. And so we operate this in such a way that that we control what's going through it. And again, like I said, that's a whole other show. So this is kind of the basic setup that you have in your room. In some way or another, you're dealing with these. Now, there may be monitors hooked up to auxiliaries. You may have in-ear monitoring, all those different kinds of things. But what we know is your church is using sound every day. And the same things that apply to this setup also apply to other setups, and allows you to be able to do remote setups. Say you're doing something in a park. I've got speakers, I've got amps, I've got my board, I've got to run between these things. I was on the phone with a church last week that was having problems setting up at a park. A friend of mine called and said, help, we don't know what's wrong. We want to always test those things out and make sure we know how they're interacting and how they work before we go do those things. But understanding how our rooms are set up is important when we're dealing with audio, and your church is definitely dealing with audio. Now, before we close out today, I will mention Restream to you. I haven't mentioned it yet because I got to talking too much. We use Restream here at Church Media Creators to make sure we're sending stuff where we want it to. Matter of fact, we're running through Restream right now. It allows you to be able to send your OBS signal or your streaming signal to whatever you want to, Facebook, YouTube, another streaming service you use. You have the ability to control that. It's simple, easy to work with, even has an OBS plugin that makes it work inside OBS seamlessly. So encourage you to check that out. We'll put a message in the comments, links you can go to get Restream. We want to make sure you have that opportunity. It's been great to have you guys with us today. I hope that this has been helpful. I know it's simple, I know it's basic, but guys, understanding how things are set up and paying attention to how our rooms are changing around our equipment helps us keep from running into a lot of problems. And so as church media creators, we want to make sure that in our rooms, we're amplifying the gospel literally with our amplifiers and our speakers, and people are hearing and understanding the Word of God so they can come to know Him better. Thanks for joining with us today. We'll catch you next week. All right, so glad you guys are with us. Mics, definitely. So yeah, there's lots of comments today. I'll just have a quick look here. Eliminate echo when we meet in a gymnasium. Oh man, I hope you're still with us right now. Okay, so I've done a lot of gyms, and gyms are the worst. So if you're in a gym, I'm assuming you're in a temporary setup, and you've got big, hard cinder block walls all around you and things like that. There's, I guess, two different answers to the question. I'm going to assume a mobile setup for a gymnasium, but then I'll also talk about kind of the non-mobile setup where you're in a gym at your church or something. Speaker placement's really important, and making sure speaker angle. And this is the problem with a mobile setup. If you're setting up on speaker stands, your speakers are pointed straight at a flat wall behind all your people. That's a really, really bad thing. What you need to do is you need to figure out a way, and some speakers have pieces in the bottom that allow this. There's some stands. You might look at some specialty stands. You need to get your speakers angled downward. You need them up on stands, not on your stage. Up on stands, but get them angled just a little bit downward into the people, and you may even need to move them closer to the people if you're not filling the gym, which most people don't because gyms are really, really big. It also applies to your monitor setup. If you're using live floor wedges in a gym, it's killing you. It's absolutely killing you. You've got to get rid of them and move to an in-ear system, because that is just that much more sound, and now it's bouncing this way. A lot of churches use pipe and drape when they do a gym. It does help dampen your sound a little bit if you can give yourself a backdrop, but get rid of any wedge monitors because they're going to kill you in that room. You need to keep your sound down and contained and keep it from going up and away, because as soon as it goes up and away, it turns into this mosh pit of mess, okay? So those would be the two things. Make sure you're not using any floor wedges, and work to get your speakers at an angle. Look for some special mount capabilities with some speaker stands and stuff. Even if you can't get them as high, if you can get them an angle, get them pointing at your people. You need their bodies really, really badly to absorb that. So yeah, so that's the best thing. You're always going to have echo. You're in a gym. There's no way to get around it. You are in an echo chamber. Now, if somehow you're in a permanent setup in a gym that's like a multi-purpose room, you can do a whole lot more things. Like you can have, and you can do this in a temporary setup, but it's pretty elaborate. You can have some roll-out carpet that actually rolls out underneath your people. Will make all the difference in the world to not have that reflective gym surface underneath them. You can put audio acoustic panels up on the walls. That'll help. All those things help. A gym's still a gym. You're definitely still going to have an echo. Definitely. Da, da, da. Let's see. We don't spam. That's right. If the amps are not on and the monitors are on, yes, feedback through your monitors would actually be more common than feedback through your mains because they're closest to your microphone. So anything turned up in your monitor is, any microphone turned up in your monitor can create a feedback loop. The placement of your monitor is really important, by the way. Making sure that your monitor is cut at an angle for a reason. It's cut at the exact angle that the microphone is actually to be held. And so in essence, if I'm using an SM58 or whatever, a cardioid pattern microphone, then that pattern is designed to pick up what's in front of the mic, not what's behind it. The problem is, if I place that monitor to my side, now I'm shooting the sound into the pattern of my microphone. So when we get feedback in our monitors, a lot of times that's what's causing is bad placement or just things are turned up too loud. But yeah, that's a very common place to get it. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about mics in the future. Yeah, I'm just kind of scrolling through. I'm probably missing some stuff, but yeah. So very cool, very cool. And yes, we are actually planning on having Justin. We've been talking about getting Justin back quite a bit lately. We're gonna do a special, some special stuff with Justin in the coming months. So if you've missed Justin, he's such a good guy, then you'll get the opportunity to interact with him as we're working on some stuff about volunteering and things. We're reworking some things he's going to be working with us together on, so that'll be a lot of fun. We just have to have the time to do it. That's the hard part. So guys, if you have questions, you can post those at the link that's in the comments right here. So glad y'all have joined with us today. Good to have you. I hope this has been beneficial. I know it's basic, but it's always good to get back to the basics. And believe it or not, I literally only made it through the first, eighth of my notes today. So maybe we'll do another show on audio before too long. All right, guys. Well, glad y'all are with us today. Hope you enjoyed yourself. If you have questions, definitely put it in the comments because some of them will probably turn into shows because we can. Obviously, I just rambled a lot about 3 primary components. So anyway, you guys have a great